Welcome to Convo Fango. Today we are here to talk about something that is near and dear to my little black heart, 80s horror. Of course, we're talking about the seminal documentary series on 80s horror, In Search of Darkness. But today we're not talking about part one, part two. We're talking about part three, maybe a little bit of part one and part two. And we've got producer, director, David Weiner with us.
Hey, you look so familiar. You look like one of the interview talent experts who might be in Search of Darkness 3. I don't know if you wanted to go over that, but I just thought I'd throw that off the bat. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Does it look familiar? Okay, this is the framing, and I'm talking about maybe incestual horror. Does that ring a
That's
bell?
right. Amityville 2,
Yeah.
Amityville 2.
I'm so grateful that I got to talk about that bonkers title. I'm like, save me some good ones. Give me some meaty ones in there. And I did. I got to talk about some weird shit.
You pounced on this wonderful opportunity, and we're so fortunate to have you in this film alongside some gent named Phil Nobile Jr. who's been in part one and part two. But yeah, you're wonderful in Search of Darkness 3. I'm telling the world that if for any reason, this is the reason right here, right, that who I'm sitting
Oh
with
yeah.
right
If you want to hear me say incest a lot, then definitely tune into this. So I kind of love, okay, because I'm a fan of part one, I'm a fan of part two. And when I heard there was a part three, I'm like, what the fuck is left? And then I'm like, okay, there's definitely stuff left, but I don't know if it's stuff that I've seen. And then like you gave me a list of titles and I was like, oh my God, there's a ton of these that I could like talk on and on and on. Like you're gonna have to cut 30 minutes out of every title that I'm talking about. So, but it's just so like mind-boggling because it's like how many hours are in part one? How many hours are on part two? Like of what we actually get to watch. Like how long are those each?
Well, In Search of Darkness Part One is 4.5 hours. In Search of Darkness Part Two, easy for me to say, is about 4.5 hours
Mhm.
and and change. This time around, we're at 5 hours and change, and that's completely asked for, demanded, wished for by our backers and the horror audience. And for those who are not entirely aware of In Search of Darkness and what this is all about, basically, in a nutshell, we're diving into 80s horror cinema. And so, collectively, with these three movies now, because In Search of Darkness 3 is now out, go to 80shorrordoc.com, buy Halloween Night at midnight to get your copy. We could talk about that later. It's 14 hours and change of an exploration into like the most amazing filmmaking decade ever. And so In Search of Darkness basically has 50, in this one, 70 horror icons who are either in front of the camera or behind the camera or experts like you talking about favorite films and how all this stuff fit into the pop culture, the socio-political climate, the zeitgeist, and our bedrooms and our basements and our lobbies and wherever else we would play this stuff that we probably shouldn't have. And it's a there's so many films that came out in the 80s that were horror films, especially because of the VHS explosion.
Yes.
And there's a convergence there of opportunity there. And so many films just bypassed the theater and went straight to video. And so you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of movies. First, In Search of Darkness was kind of the heavy hitters, the franchises, the Freddy, the Jason, the Hellraiser kind of stuff. Second one, we went a little more international, a little more eclectic, a little more of the deep dives. And you think by the third time,
Mm-hmm.
is this bottom of the barrel? What is left? But then you realize because there was just so much material there, there's theatrical stuff we still haven't gotten to. Anything from Blood Beach to Jaws 4 to Amityville 2, which is quite an experience for anyone who chooses to watch that. And then of course all this straight to video stuff, all this shot on video stuff, and there's still so many amazing titles that I know everyone listening loves that'll say,
Mm-hmm.
why you couldn't even get to it in part three? And I say, I wish I could, but we ran out of time.
How do you choose like which ones get on the chopping block? I don't know if you have titles where it's like I don't know if like for part one, if you actually filmed interviews for certain titles, intending to use it in part one, and then you guys were just like, we just have way too much, and then that ended up in part two. But it's like, how do you decide what goes? Because even like I said, like in part three, there's some of my favorites like on this list, and I'm like, how did these not get covered in part one and two? Or like I
Right.
didn't even dawn on me that they weren't covered in part one and
Like you
two.
think a movie like Prom Night, like Prom
Yes.
Night probably would have been in the first one. And it was to a certain degree because we did a chapter on holiday horror.
Mhm.
So it fit nicely in there. What happened is, especially with this first one, this is a crowd-funded project. And so we got 50 people talking about all this stuff. I had my list of movies that we wanted to talk about. And what happens is it's a big conversation and celebration about all these
Oh,
bunch of
wait.
people.
Sorry. Conversation and celebration, and then it like it glitched. So
I'm back. I'm back.
there you go.
It's, these movies are an absolute celebration of the genre. And when I talk about celebration, I'm talking about a number of people having this wonderful conversation, as if you're hanging out in the back of a bar where it closes at 2:30 and they let you stay with all the horror icons just to talk until the sun comes up. That's what it's like. So you have a variety of people talking about the same thing from their own individual perspective. And whenever I put an individual segment together, I think, what do I have here? First of all, do I have anyone from this movie, in front of the camera or behind the camera talking about it? Because they're the authority, really, first and foremost. But then after that, people who love these movies or people who are true experts about it, what material do I have that all comes together and it all fits? And I assemble this massive long form documentary because you're going through an entire decade where in each year you've got anywhere from 6, 7, 8, 9, sometimes 10 titles in there. And it flies, but it really has to be something that I am satisfied with. And so Phil Nobile Jr. will be the first to say, I talked about the unseen for part one, and it didn't make the cut. But part two, I was like, this is perfect. It's like the wonderful eclectic title that people really need to know about. And since he came back for a second interview, I had him do it again. Because there's the bearded Phil Nobile Jr. and then there's the non-bearded Phil Nobile Jr.
The
Like,
baby
let's make
face
this
Phil.
match.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it didn't make it. And then he's really holding my feet to the fire because I'm like, and I'm going to answer your question, how does it not make the cut? But I had him do it again, and this time it's in it. And we joked about, well, do we do beardless or bearded or just a half beard? Like, how are we going to solve this problem?
Just keep cutting back and forth. He's like, he has like a giant ass beard, and then he has no beard, and then he has
Right,
beard, and it's
exactly.
like, what is happening here?
I was finding pictures of people who had like a full beard, like Will Forte had a full beard that shaved his half beard off.
Yeah.
Um, it's really just about how great is the material or how lively or how informative or how does it flow. What year does it fit in when there's all these other films competing for attention?
Right.
And that's really what it comes down to. Especially in the second half of the 80s, there were just so many more horror films being made that were responding to the success of the first half of the 80s and people really loving the genre. So I'm stuck with a problem where there's just so many more to choose from and I can't fit them all. And so, a movie like The Unseen, for whatever reason, that year might have been a year where I had a little more of the talent that was from the film versus someone who wasn't from the film talking about it. And that would inform my decision.
Okay.
Is that an exciting answer, or is that just kind of a disappointment about
I'm so disappointed, but I'm
done?
excitedly disappointed, so it's okay. No, I mean, I imagine that's how you would have to approach it because it's like it's one of those like kill your darlings kind of situations. Like I don't imagine there are very many movies included in this that you're like, "Oh, I don't really give a shit about this one, but like other people do, so I got to talk about it." Like I feel like that's probably a very, very small list if it exists at all. So at that point, it's like, what exciting stuff do we have to surround this title? And you kind of have to use it that way.
Well, and it's very important that you bring that up because what I think is special about these films is that everything is on an even playing field. So you could have The Shining, which, critically acclaimed, and you can have The Unseen. Hardly have anyone's seen it, but someone's
pretty unseen.
Someone exactly, and now will be seen. But it's been championed by someone who loves it and explains why.
Phil.
Phil Nobile Jr. has. I think he might have talked about it, and 3 times. And So it's important for me to not position these films as this one's great and this one's
Mhm.
terrible. You know, I think collectively we all know, especially as horror fans, and especially when we're now in this third part of the trilogy where arguably this stuff really is unseen. And the thing is, some of us really love this stuff for reasons that go beyond the film. You
Mhm.
know, that's what's most important. I want to put everything on an even playing field. If you've never seen it, this is what it's about. This is why it resonates. This is why it's important within the context of the decade and that year. And this is why you should know about it and check it out. But also, I lost my train of thought completely because I thought of something else. But
Okay.
yeah, you know, these movies are more than just the movie itself because of
Mhm.
that. These movies are really about who we were, where we were, how old we were when we saw these, and the moment that we saw these, it just made an incredible impact on
Mhm.
you, and especially when you're at an impressionable age, they're indelible. So someone like you who loves, say, Motel Hell, you know, and you saw that and that rocked your world and changed your life, and but people are like, Motel Hell, really? You're like, no, you don't understand. You must see this, and here's why. That passion is what we all share.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of what we tap into in these films.
Oh, 100%. I think that's why this is so fun. Like to say to me, like before I saw the first one, I was like, oh, that concept sounds like really great. And then I'm like, a 4 hour, 4 hours, like what? And then I ended up sitting and watching the whole fucking thing because it was so fun. But it's very much that vibe that you described. Like it's like, all right, the bar's closing down, it's 2:30, you're sitting with some of your friends, you run into some other horror nerds. And it's that like you can see in these interviews when someone's eyes light up
Oh
with the
yeah.
passion about this weird fucking title that it's like maybe you've heard of it but maybe it's not your favorite, or maybe you never got around to watching it because it's like most people are like but you meet the one person who's like, this is my fucking jam and I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you about how my big brother had the VHS and I saw it and I wasn't supposed to because I was 7 and I was too young and it
Right?
just was
It's a
like
whole story
yeah.
that just goes beyond the film itself. And that's part of the story. You know, we all have our drunk tales where it's not, well, I just got drunk. No, it's everything leading up to it and everything that went south afterwards,
Yes.
right?
It's this
But it's
whole
another
journey.
night
It
where we
sets
all
up
get drunk.
like the ambiance of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, this was an experience. It's not just a movie about a guy who like serves up, fritters made out of people. It's like this
Right.
whole let me set the scene for you kind of thing.
And when someone like Joe Dante is championing Motel Hell, you stand up and you pay attention as well.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
I think what's cool about these films is that you have all these horror icons who are just talking about not only the projects that they're known for and they've worked on, but other stuff that they just love. They're
Yes.
all film fans, you know? I mean, so it's so cool. Like in part three, having John Carpenter saying, you know, I asked him, I'm like, John, you know, what are some of your favorite films of the 80s in so many words? And he's like, well, I was really busy working in the 80s, so I didn't really see much. But I saw a lot of great films in the 70s, and I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you know, and we're like, ooh, you know, John Carpenter's singling out Texas Chainsaw. Time for a revisit, just to look at it from his perspective.
Right. No, I think that's so cool. And also it's that thing like what I appreciate so much, and I think it applies to our genre in particular. Like it's such like a very horror specific thing. But I guess just this fact of like, okay, the people with the coolest jobs in the whole world, but they're just fucking nerds, and that's how they got those jobs in the first place, is because they were fans and they're still fans. So that's like my favorite thing is watching like your favorite directors just like nerd out on like what
Yeah.
got them into it or what like what their like big titles are, and it's just so fun to see because it's like that passion. You can see it in their eyes and in their face when they're talking about something, and like maybe they'll be talking about something and then you mention the title and then they're like, oh, and then like perk up and they come to life, and it's like that's so fun to watch that like transformation. You're like, oh, I'm about to hear some good shit right now.
Well, that's the thing, you know, because you've done countless interviews and you understand that the way to any famous person's heart who has to say the same thing over and over and over again about the same thing just to plug a project or just they're known for something that happened way back when. You know, they get, you see also in their eyes that spark is lost and they're in
Blaze
on autopilot mode.
yeah.
It all started when, you
Yeah.
know, I've heard this before and I've said this before, and they wake up when they're done talking, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
So when you very much single out a very specific thing, That is not the common thing that they're normally there to talk about. They perk up. That I mean, sometimes they're just like, "Well, what'd you put in your coffee this morning to make it special?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, God, I love coffee, and I have to have
Yeah.
it this way." And
Yeah.
sometimes the most mundane things are the things that people connect with, especially if it's they're not. They'd rather be talking about some other things. And so the In Search of Darkness movies are super cool, is because everyone comes to us and they sit down with us for an hour,
Mhm.
sometimes 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours. I do believe Rocco T. Thompson put you through the ringer for 7.5 hours,
It
wasn't it?
was 7 and 45 minutes, but I mean, who's
Yeah.
counting?
Shout out to Rocco T. Thompson. I was
Yes.
finishing up In Search of Tomorrow, and so Rocco did a lot of the heavy lifting, and incredibly capable interviewer. And so he was gracious to sit down with you. And I heard you laughing because he's like, "Well, David says you have to say this," and you're like, "David's here somewhere. All right, I am an automaton. I'm one of those dolls where you pull the string and I will give you your
Yeah.
thing."
I was like, I
Maybe,
will absolutely not say that I hate Motel Hell. I refuse. I'm not going to
yes.
say that. You can't make me say that.
You and I recently, we live in the same city in the perhaps neck of the woods, and we ran into each other. And you're like, "Who the heck are you?" And I'm like, "I've been looking at you like every day, and I'm not a stalker. I'm a director."
Which is a professional stalker. So
Yeah,
I'm safe. I'm a safe
exactly.
guy. No, that was amazing because I was just so like not in that headspace, like not in that zone. I was like, pulling up to the store and like
Yeah,
Angel.
well, you
And
were
I
in
was like,
shopping mode. I need to get my stuff.
yeah, I was like, what's on my Target list? Don't spend $500 in Target right now. You're
Yeah,
only going for toothpaste. And then I heard Angel and I was like, yes. I'm like, rolled down my
yeah,
window,
like
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 popped
just
over.
just a little enough.
And then I'm staring at you like I was like, just
Yeah,
like frozen, like, hi. And you're like, you don't know who the fuck I am. And I was like, I don't
exactly. And it
know.
was that much more disarming because I was with my kids, so I'm just some random guy shopping as well.
Yeah. I was like, did I babysit your kid at one point?
Yeah,
I don't know. No,
exactly.
he's a little young, probably. I don't
Yeah.
know. No, but
So
that was awesome though. Once I realized who you were, because you were just like you were emails and a disembodied voice primarily for our interactions, right?
I understand. You need to connect the human with the name and
Yes,
all
exactly.
that stuff like that. But to my point, we sit down for a long time with everybody, but everyone sits down specifically for us, and
Mhm.
so they quickly realize everyone we get wonderful interviews because everyone gets comfortable knowing that first of all it's not live, so you're not on the spot. So if you screw something up, or if you can't remember anything, or you need a little, IMDb help on a particular crew member, we could look it up and make you look great. But on top of that, people just love talking about the stuff that they're not commonly asked, and
Right.
especially when we give, like you said, you've got that massive list, and you're like, oh, intimidating list. Steve Johnson, he's just like, I thought I was taking the SATs. What's this whole massive list? But you look at that and you're like, oh, wait, no, I love that. Can I talk about that? I could definitely talk about that.
Mhm.
I don't like this movie, but that's one thing. I love this, so I could tell you about this.
Yes.
And so I take all those pieces and I put it together to the big conversation about all this stuff. And that's where the energy comes from.
Yes. Well, it's just fun. I mean, who doesn't like talking about your favorite shit like with your friends, right? And like to your guys' credit, the interviewers are great because it's like I'm not used to getting interviewed. I'm used to being the interviewer. So I was like, oh, I don't know, like this is gonna feel weird. But then it ended up just like this, I'm talking with Rocco on a screen, and then like 5 minutes into it, I'm just like laughing my ass off and we're having
Yeah.
such a great time. And I'm like, oh yeah, and then this other weird part in the movie, and like he's a fan as well. So we're just going back and forth. And like that's very much the vibe of the whole project is like getting
And
drunk with
turning
your
it back on
friends.
you as well as an interviewer, someone who is they quickly ascertain whether or not you know their stuff,
Mhm.
whether you understand what their career was like and their trajectory and the other work that they've done other than the one thing that they're there to talk about.
Right.
And you quickly, once someone connects with you as the interviewer, who understands, oh, this person knows me and gets me and sees me, I feel seen, then the conversation really gets real easy and fun.
Do you feel seen right now? On like how seen do you feel? 1 to 10.
I feel seen. I feel seen.
Do you feel more
Yeah.
seen than how seen you felt in the Target parking lot? I
Yeah,
want to read
yeah.
you.
Well, I had to earn my scene there, clearly.
I just like I wish I had a redo because I could feel my face go and
Well,
then
I
just
didn't.
nothing.
I knew off the bat you were like, "Who the f is this?" But you know, but I'm comfortable with that by saying yes, but you do know me, and here's why. Like I wouldn't have like if I don't know. I don't if I recognize a celebrity, and I will put you in that category because I picked you out of the crowd because I knew you from at least this part of your body.
That's why I
And
just carry around a cutout with me to like make like a Zoom frame when
right,
people are, and I'm
right.
like, oh, and they're like, I don't know who the fuck you are, and I just hold it up and like, you might
Well,
recognize me from Zoom.
up until that point, I assumed you had a bottom half, but I still didn't see it because you were
You
in
still
between.
don't know. You still
Yeah,
saw me like this because it was through the window. So you don't
exactly.
know. You don't know what's happening. It
But
was just like
yeah, no,
tentacles.
that's the secret of approaching someone who you know, but they don't know you is telling them why they do know you, and then
Yes.
if that is the case.
That's the kind thing to do. It's really unkind when someone's like, "Oh, hi," and they say your name, and then they don't introduce or say why you do actually know them, and they just leave it at that. And then you're like, "Great to see you again."
I never assume that people. I'm one of those people. I project. So I'm one of those people who I remember every face. I do, and I remember all the context,
Mhm.
but the name, whoa,
Yeah.
I'm searching. I'm searching. While I'm saying, "Hey, how's it going? It's good to see you." I know exactly who you are, but my brain's catching up, saying, "Okay, I know it's somewhere here, somewhere."
Yes.
So
Where
anyway,
your like Rolodex is like insanely massive. So I'm like, you got to give it some time to like catch up. You're like, yes, know the face, know the context, can tell you 50 like facts about yourself, but I just the name is like your little like brain assistants are like, oh, in the Rolodex, and I'm like, but you got like
pretty
thousands to
much.
go through. That's forgivable, I feel like.
Got to take the ginkgo biloba so it works its way up fast.
Yes, ginkgo biloba, get on it. Just- So, what are you most excited for about this third installment? Because now we have a proper trilogy, which any kind of horror franchise worth its salt needs to have at least a trilogy, right? To really solidify it in the canon.
I can't believe that we are finalizing a trilogy, that we have a third installment, that it is 4.5 hours, 4.5 hours, and now 5 hours.
Mhm.
It really kind of blows me away because we never intended to do that in the first place. But the response has been just so overwhelmingly positive and encouraging. And we wouldn't have done part two if people really didn't respond so positively
Right.
to part one. Then add Shudder to the mix, and exponentially it explodes because so many more eyes are on these projects. So when we did two, I really kind of thought that was the nail in the coffin
Mhm.
in terms of content. Even though I knew there was plenty more to go, I figured, yeah, I think two 4.5 hour movies, that's probably what everyone wants and no more. So when Letterboxd is the great equalizer when it comes to candid reviews, and so I go to Letterboxd to see, all right, fair enough, they hate me because of this, and they hate the movie because of that. Da, 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 da. It's usually not personal. It's usually just the movie sucks or the movie's great.
Okay.
But everyone is. But there was so many amazing, wonderful. I just inject this in my arm. I could watch this 7 days a week, 24/7,
Mhm.
52 a week, 2 days, weeks a year. Right?
Yeah.
I could watch it all the
What
time.
is time? Does it even matter?
Right.
Okay.
Um, and I just felt it was an embarrassment of riches how many people just were saying more, more, more,
Mhm.
and it was incredibly encouraging. And it's really fun. I'll tell you my favorite Letterbox review is I think it was for In Search of Darkness 2, and it was like 5 stars, great, 5 stars, I love it, 5 stars. I'm like, this, who's handing out the 20s at the door? And then 5 stars, and then there's one who said like no stars, and it says, why the fuck is this 4.5 hours? And I'm like, fair enough. That's a very good question.
But I want to know,
Maybe
did they
it's
sit
not
and
for you.
watch? Did they sit and watch the 4.5 hours, or did they just see the runtime and go, why the fuck is this 4.5 hours?
It's intimidating. I think it's a badge of honor if for anyone who has watched these more than once, but making it through the first time even, it's a tall drink of water. I understand that, to sit down for that. And it is designed where you can at any year or any, movie, they go quickly,
Mhm.
thanks to Sam Way who edits these movies, they just fly. And so there's any point where you could just hit stop and come back the next day or whenever.
Yes, I will
But
confess, I did not watch it in one sitting. I think I did two sittings. but I didn't have to like 10 sittings, but I didn't do one.
I pass no judgment if you watch if it took more than a couple sittings to watch. I mean, I get it. I understand that completely.
You got to do a
But
marathon of all three, and then whoever completes it gets like a shirt and like a hat, you know?
I survived the 14-hour screening of In Search of Darkness in order, chronological order, you know.
Amazing.
I mean, how cool would it be if we took all part one, part two, and part three, and then integrated it all? So all 1980 is from each year, you know, all
Oh,
19, you know, expanded each year, and you know, you double up all the chapters and stuff like that, and that would
yeah.
be really, that would really inform you of what this decade was all about, because you
Yes.
see a much more eclectic mix each year and how the horror genre progresses
Hmm.
through that decade. You would definitely see that. But I think capping this trilogy with a third film, obviously a sense of accomplishment and happiness that people wanted this. Um, but it really informed the way I look at this whole decade as well, because I grew up in this decade. You know, I was born in '68, so I was a '70s kid and an '80s teen, and so I was seeing a lot of these movies as they were rolling out, whether I should have been or not. You know, in the theater or sneaking on cable at a friend's house, you know, at a sleepover, you know, or coercing someone to let me into a rated R movie if I like gave them the money, or I
Right.
bought them popcorn to get me in the theater.
Yeah.
I tried it all. But all these films, as I was progressing, there's the ones I loved and that really just transformed me, kind of like American Werewolf in London,
Mhm.
you know, just so many Reanimators, some of these, you know, Evil Dead 2, they really cemented my love for this stuff. But there were others where, as a cynical teen back in the '80s, I saw right through the game, and I'm like, all right, yeah, I
Mhm.
like seeing another Nightmare on Elm Street, but come on, they're just really milking this one, you know.
Yeah.
Freddy's just a comedian on stage right now,
You're right.
or oh, Hellraiser or Chucky, you know, they want their franchise character to go on and on and on. I now look back at all this stuff and love it and pass no judgment. But it took me decades to come back to it and really explore it again, to
Mhm.
see a different point of view and to put it in the context of how things are and how much horror is influenced by this decade currently. So when you look back at these things, you know, they might be a little rough around the edges sometimes, but the practical effects hold up, the storytelling holds up, the imagination is there no matter what the budget. And the things that I was cynical about in terms of, you know, sequels and new sort of iconic characters that I knew were just going to be around for a while, I love them now and I can appreciate their films that much more.
Mhm.
And so it's been really an evolution for me as just a movie fan, you know, looking back at these with the best homework in the world, watching all of these movies for
Right.
my job.
No, I love that aspect of it as well. Whether it's something that you're already a fan of or that you're not necessarily the biggest fan of, but seeing people speak on it on different perspectives, and it kind of makes you be like, oh fuck, I didn't think about like this angle of it, or I'm thinking about it in a different way, or just even just where you're at in life when you watch something, it makes a difference. So it's like if there I saw a movie when I was like 13, I didn't really think about it again. And then I'm hearing somebody say something like really poignant about it. And I'm like, oh shit, maybe I should revisit that as an adult. And I'm like, oh, it's that's like a total game changer. Like 13, I didn't know what the hell was happening in that movie. But now it's like saying all these different things to me now. So it's kind of like that, like nice little like revisit this for this kind of reason.
It's the movie In Search of Darkness is something that allows you to revisit movies that you still might not like, but you can appreciate the effort and the idea and the intention behind it more now. You know, especially a really bad movie, like a movie like Things, the Canadian movie. You know, it's like no one sets out to make a bad movie, but you know, you only have what you bring to the table when you're making this film, whether it's a you know budget and talent and
Yeah.
resources. Yet they still, all credit to them, got a film made. And whatever you think of this final product, we're talking about it to this day, good or bad.
Right.
There's no bad publicity, right?
Yes.
You know, and I've told people also, like, you can look at a movie like Things and if anything, if it inspires you to make your own horror film, because you look at it and you say, well, all these people, they just got together, they got their friends, they
Mhm.
did it, they made a movie. If they could do it, I could do something as good if not better.
Right.
At
Yeah.
least you think you can.
Yes,
You know?
right. You think you can, and then you go and you try and do it. And I'm like, okay,
But
now let me hear you talk shit about things. Yeah.
that's a good low bar, good low hanging fruit to start with, though, especially if you're delusional.
Right. But it's that thing of like everyone's always like, what is it, armchair quarterback or whatever, and it's like, yeah, I'm like, I just, you don't shit on a film, because it's like anything that gets made and you're showing it outside of just like your living room to your mom, like that's a fucking miracle in itself. Like you made it, it's a tangible thing. You took it out of your head, you got people together and involved, and you have something that you can tangibly show. Now up that, and you're either on movie screens or in fucking on VHS shelves. I'm like, that's miraculous to me. So it's like, don't
It's
talk too
very
much shit.
true.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also it's so easy because there's this deluge of material coming our way, just to say, it's like media Tinder, swiping
Right.
left and right. This is hot, this is not, whatever, however you do it. But it's like one of those things where the internet has erased any empathy, for whoever's on the other side, because you don't have to face another human being, because no one, some people do, but the majority of polite individuals, if they don't like something, if they come face to face with that individual who made that project, they would not say, oh, this was a piece of shit. They'd be like, oh, I saw it, good for you. Like,
yeah,
you can still not like it and still at least pay a compliment or have something, maybe constructive to say. I don't know.
yeah.
People like to sort of step in and say that, but it is what it is. I mean, you just sort of have to look at all this stuff at face value with the world we live in now. But I think you make the most important point here is you have to have some understanding that people worked really hard. I used to work on theatrical. I worked for 4 years running around on a set with a headset and a walkie-talkie, rolling cut. I worked on a bunch of full moon movies, and a lot of these movies, you just work really, 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 really hard. You put your blood, sweat, and tears in it. And some movies catch on, some movies resonate, some movies are remembered for the wrong reasons. But the fact that anything was completed and got released is an absolute win.
And there's just so many people that put their time and their energy and their passions and their love into it. So I'm like, you know what? Maybe it wasn't for you, but maybe there's some other kid that's watching that's like, it's like blowing their mind, and that's awesome. And maybe that kid's gonna grow and like try to make their own movie and be the next fucking like Raimi or something, like.
That's kind of part of my just sort of personal campaign out in the world, is I try not to, like you said, I just don't like to shit on other stuff.
There's
Sometimes
no
that's
reason
the
to.
knee-jerk reaction, but I try and keep myself in check, or if I have nothing, if you don't have any, Bambi and
Thumper,
right?
Thumper it, yeah.
My mom told me if you have nothing good to say, don't say
Don't
anything.
say nothing at all. Your grammar is much better than Thumper's, but yeah. The sophisticated
Listen, we can all
version.
learn from Bambi.
Yes, Bambi it up. When in doubt, Bambi it up.
There's a great chapter that we talk about. I don't want to reveal too much, but you figure very prominently in it, and it was very fun to have you talking about horror and the flexibility of the genre, and how horror kind of can lurk in any genre, even like a Disney film.
Yeah.
And you talk about some of that stuff, and that is one of my favorite chapters in this movie, In Search of Darkness Part 3, because we do talk about films like or Willy Wonka or Pinocchio, and
Yes.
and your reactions to that stuff are absolutely priceless. So.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed my childhood trauma.
Right? You talk about, well, I won't even name the name of another film, but there's another gateway horror film that you talked about where that was complete kinder trauma for you.
Look at me now, Mom. Yeah.
I just hung you out on display for all the neuroses that we all share.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. I hope someone sitting at home is like, oh yes, good. I can relate to this. Like I'm not alone.
Well, they will. You're the conduit for a bunch of these things. Absolutely.
Perfect. I'm here for it. Sign me up. All right. Thank you so much. Is this going to be on Shudder as well, In Search of Darkness 3?
Right now, all we're looking at is making and manufacturing it ourselves.
Okay.
For part 1 and part 2 did end up on Shudder, but this, that's like next on. We talk to Shutter and figure that one out. But it's very about the immediate thing right now.
Okay.
And talking about the immediacy of it is, if you want In Search of Darkness Part 3, you need to act between now and midnight on Halloween by going to 80shorrordoc.com. And the reason of this urgency, the clock is ticking, boys and girls, it's almost time, is the reason is the film is done, but we still have to do the end credits. And what we love to do is we love to have, when we crowdfund it, we make it, and then when we're ready to put it out, we have a final sale and a final push where everyone who is backing the project gets to have, you get to have your name in the credits. How cool is that? So it's your name, or if it's your podcast, or a loved one, or your dog, anything that this makes it more than just a movie that you buy. It becomes a keepsake. And there's all sorts of cool swag and stuff like that. There's posters and digital download and the soundtrack and lots of really cool stuff. We have this video membership card, kind of like we used to get when we would have our mom and pop video store, and that gets cool stuff for merch and with like Fangoria and stuff like that. But one thing we're doing as well, which is very cool, is because especially this Part 3, all of the content, all of it, was chosen by the backers. We did a survey where everyone could fill out everything that they'd like to see this third time around. Everyone voted on a top portion of it. I don't want to reveal what finally, because I want there to be surprises for everybody. I really want to give back to the fans and the backers of this project who have pretty much dictated everything that is going to be in Search of Darkness Part 3. The passion of the fans is incredibly important. And so in addition to getting your name in the credits when you get In Search of Darkness Part 3, or the trilogy, you can get the trilogy too, if you don't have Part 1 or Part 2 in your hands, physical media, you talk about that too. What I want to do is I want to give back to everybody. And so while the credits are going, I want everybody, I'd love for you, well, you shouldn't do it because you're already in the movie, but everyone listening, record a video testimonial about how much you love 80s horror. What does 80s horror mean to you? A film, a filmmaker, maybe the In Search of Darkness franchise, but you don't have to brown nose about it. I just want, from your heart, the absolute passion why we all love this. And if you go to our socials on 80s Horror Doc on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, there's a Linktree link. You click on that, and that's going to tell you exactly how to submit your video. But do that by Halloween night as well. But what I plan to do is, now I can't promise every single one, but these credits run long. And so I want to pack these credits from top to bottom with as many faces as possible and as many of you talking about how much this stuff means to you, to all of us, why 80s horror is so amazing. And who knows, maybe there won't be a dry eye in the house when it's all done. But you got to get it done. Go to 80shorrordoc.com to get the film and to find out more and to see Angel and the Fangoria crew, Phil Nobile Jr. Also, there are a couple other folks that are some of your contributors in various degrees. So Richard Newby is one of the experts talking about this. Xanthi Perililio, apologies, Xanthi Perililio, who has an amazing but tough last name for some reason. She's in it, and she's amazing. And sorry, Xanthi, about that. And David Dasmalchian is in it as well. So two Chainsaw Awards alum are part of this, talking and celebrating this amazing era. So it's like a Fangoria fest if you get In Search of Darkness 3 as well.
Packing it with that Fango fan.
Right.
I love it. So good. And there's also an Elvira edition that's available. Is that right?
Yeah, we have two special editions. Each time we make the movie, there's the main movie, but there's two collector's editions this time, Corey Taylor and Elvira. And so you can get those as well. If you go to their social media, you could find the link to get it specifically. Go to Corey Taylor's socials or go to Elvira's socials, and that's the way you could find it as well.
Very cool. All right. 80shorrordoc.com. Get there. I want to sing the Silver Shamrock song, but I don't know when this is going to air. So I like have to edit in like
Well,
the
it's
all
gonna
day
be
stuff.
there's
Yeah.
most time, kids. The clock is ticking. The big
Yeah.
show's at 9,
Get
which
your
just turned
orders in.
40 years old just this
Yes.
past week or so. And I, on the day that it turned 40, I did a rewatch, and I really enjoyed doing it. I have, I always loved the movie, but I fully embraced each and everything about
Yes.
Halloween 3.
I
And
love it.
I've always stood by it because I was like, it's called Season of the Witch, and there's no mention of Michael Myers. And okay, I understand that you're a little befuddled, but then they showed it where Tom Atkins is watching in the bar. That check out, Friday night is Halloween on Halloween night, and it's on a TV, and then he's sitting there, and while he's strapped to the chair, they show, he's watching Halloween and Jamie Lee Curtis, screaming and everything like that. If you haven't figured out by then that Michael Myers isn't coming, then maybe that wasn't the movie for you.
And that's in one of those cases where it's like maybe that movie wasn't for me. That movie was 100% made for me, but I mean, anyone who is not a fan of it, you just got to be like, maybe that wasn't for me.
I still wish that that had found some sort of success, maybe marketed it differently, where they just called it Season of the Witch,
Mhm.
or John Carpenter's Halloween anthology, something. But I understand why John Carpenter was just like, well, that failed, so forget it. But I would have loved to have an anthology, where every year, every other year, we get a brand new, Joe Dante was going to make one of those.
Mhm.
It could have been so cool.
That would have been
And
epic.
and you could do that at the same time Michael Myers is still
Right.
slicing and dicing
Yeah.
in Haddonfield.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think Halloween Ends is one of those films where it sort of took a curveball like Halloween 3, but this time it did have Michael Myers, but the marketing was a bit of a bait and switch, so it was a very polarized response. But I really embraced it, and I thought it was very cool that they decided to chart new territory rather than just do the obvious. I think you kind of got best of both worlds.
Everything about it though was, I mean, I loved it because it was so fucking weird. No, I'm not gonna say any spoilers, but just its existence was like an Easter egg to Halloween 3 season of the witch, except for the fact that we get Michael Myers, because I know people are watching it, it's going like, what the shit is this? Like, what is happening? And I'm like, that's what people were saying when Halloween 3 came out, and now it has this cult following, and it's one of like one of the best in the whole fucking franchise. It's a completely separate thing. It's like its own beast. And
And
that's
to the
kind of
point
the
where they
thing.
use the Halloween
Yeah.
3 font instead.
Yes.
All
Yeah.
I could say is, if I have any disappointment whatsoever, is I was hoping that this would totally go off the rails and converge with Halloween 3. And I figured the only way that Michael Myers could still be alive after he just got assaulted at the end of Halloween Kills is if he's a Conal Cochran robot, from Silver Shamrock. And then it would make complete sense, and I'd be completely on board, and it would converge with the takeover of Halloween by Silver Shamrock.
Did
And
you
I
see
didn't
there
get it.
was originally a kind of a convergence written into the script? It was going to end at the Silver Shamrock Factory, where we get like a pumpkin mask, a witch mask, a skeleton
Oh, I
mask, and
wish
then
they had
a
done that.
Michael
I wish they
Myers
had done
mask.
that. I wish. Oh my God, that would have been perfect. Someone did a video where they took that final shot where you see Michael's mask and Don't Fear the Reaper comes on, and it's you know. I guess we are spoiling things. I won't even say anything, but there's his mask, and they get closer and closer and closer. And what they did was they played with it, where so on the neck of the mask there was what was once a
Mm,
disc that said Silver Shamrock that had fallen off.
nice. Okay. See?
Listen, it's crazy and it's ridiculous, and why can't it be Silver Shamrock crazy and ridiculous? I would buy
I
that
mean,
for a
it was
comic.
in there. It was in there. And I'm like, that makes so much sense because it's like, oh, the Easter egg that was almost in there. And I'm like, no, like, as like to me, the whole movie is an Easter egg and an homage to Halloween 3 because it was like completely like, and the tone is just going to go off the rails now. We have this completely different thing, except for we get Michael Myers in this, but it's so
I
weird.
love that. I love that.
Yes.
Director's cut, put it back in.
Yeah, but his reasoning was cool because he's like, no, like I think someone could do something so cool with that like if someone was to take Season of the Witch and then make an actual like sequel to that, or go with the anthology and like make that actually exist. So I'm like, okay, I guess that's a good reason to be like, oh, I'll leave it for someone to do a more complete thing with it. But I'm like, it makes sense to me that it was in the script, because the whole fucking thing to me felt like, all right, they made their Halloween 3. Now we're gonna make our weird Halloween 3.
Right,
Like,
right.
yeah.
I think people will, once it all cools down, people will look back on this, and I think that it'll have a greater appreciation. But
It's totally going to. It's going to be the Season of the Witch of our time. Like it was so polarizing, but in 20 years, people are going to be nerding out over it and like all about it.
I used to work at Entertainment Tonight, and I used to have to dissect every single trailer, every teaser of the trailer, every trailer for the teaser for the trailer, to the point where there was nothing new when I finally got to see a movie, because I'd seen so much of it. And now that I've moved way beyond that, I make it a practice where if I know I'm going to see the film, I don't consume any media. I get mad if I see like a billboard on the side of the bus. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. I'm going to see it. No spoilers, And so I did not watch anything for Halloween Ends. And so I went in just completely, well, let's see what happens next. I watched Halloween Kills the night before to refresh my memory. And so I was not so radically thrown, because what I do always is after I see the movie, then I put on the trailer. And I'm like, yeah, I was right. Yeah, I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
It's completely spoiled, and I would have been upset. So that I live a very pure life when it comes to movies now. I like to have them unfold in real time without any expectations, and it's a very organic experience.
I do love that. I cannot promote that because I need you to go to the website and watch all the trailers that I'm going to tell you about. So
okay.
No, but I do love there are times when I get like Barbarian, I went in super duper blind because that like press screening was quite early before they were telling really
and I haven't seen it, and it's on HBO, and I'm going to be watching it probably as soon as we get off now. But
go watch it. But it's fun. But it's just like the fact, like it's just such a gift to be able to go in and be surprised by something nowadays. And I was like, oh, okay, all right,
That's the way it is, and that's good. And for every franchise that's out there, like a Halloween Ends, you have original content like Barbarian or Smile, and that's wonderful. And so everyone really needs to support the original ideas, but the franchises have their places, these big tent poles, because they enable these studios, Blumhouse or just a big studio, if they're making bank on a bankable project, then they'll put more money into fresh ideas and things that are a little more risk, where it even though these days when marketing costs millions more than the budget of a film itself, they don't want to take any risks or gambles, and so they'll take more risks on brand new content. But we all have to show up and vote with our dollar for all this stuff.
Give us the tent poles, and then we also get shit like Malignant.
Right. Exactly.
It's a perfect example.
Yeah. Sorry, got on my soapbox there for a minute.
No, I'm like, oh shit, okay, we got it. Okay.
It's my ethos, though. It really is.
Yeah, same. I could talk about this stuff all day, which again is why the documentary is so fun, because it's just like being at a bar with your friends and shooting shit over your favorite stuff.
And enthusiastic about the stuff we love. And so, if anything, In Search of Darkness is something that's about nostalgia and the movies we love. And it maybe not isn't necessarily about the movies themselves. You could discover movies and help curate your list for things that you want to get to. But there's plenty of stuff where you're just like, I never, I'm now rethinking this film, and I'm going to give it another try. And especially when Angel talked about Motel Hell and said, you got to see it, and here's why. Listen, we all got to go check that out.